So we're going to, I'm going to be welcoming up Anong Migwans Beam in a moment, but the first thing I'd like to do is give her and her son Luke's a warm welcome to the event tonight and to Thunder Bay. So yeah, I'll be calling you up in a moment, Anong. So first I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors and supporters. And when I say supporter, my first thought is to say thank you to the land, which is our supporter. So the gallery, as many of you know, is located on the traditional territory of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. This is the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Métis. And I think the presence of this land that comes through in the works of art in this room and in other places, in Anong's paintings and in other places, feels undeniable and beautiful. I'd also like to acknowledge other organizations that support the work we do here at the gallery, including the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, the City of Thunder Bay, and RBC, who is a sponsor of our fall season exhibitions. I'd also like to say, I skipped over this, hello to anyone who's joining us online. This is also being recorded, so if you'd like to find it later, you can look it up on our YouTube. But just as a note to everyone out there tonight who's not here, you're very welcome and we're glad to have you. So great exhibitions like this one that we're sitting in is the work of a great team. And I'd like to thank some of our staff members who make exhibitions like this one look as good as they do. So thank you to our installation team, Tricia Roy and Damien Riversmore, and also our collections manager, Megan Ely. A shout out to Valen Sacchetti, who's over there running point on administration and helped in organizing tonight's event. And I'd also like to do a special shout out to some new staff that we have who are, I know at least one of them is in attendance. Anthony Santoro and Aaron Zerm, and they are in our education department, and they've been taking students on all kinds of tours, or what I would probably better describe as adventures through this exhibition and the others in the gallery, and it's been really cool to see kids of all ages really engage with this work and hear about it from Anthony and Aaron. So welcome to them and thank you for the work you've been doing so far. So adventure, I think, is a really good word to describe the exhibition that we're sitting in called Petal, Clay, Berry, Leaf, Natural Inks, Dyes, and Pigments of Northern Ontario. So this is a group exhibition by 4 artists. The artists are Tuya Hansen, Betty Karpik, who is in the crowd tonight. Betty, do you want to shout out Betty? Sister Mollusk and Anong Beam. This is the first exhibition at the gallery that focuses on natural inks, dyes, and pigments in Northern Ontario. And it really is a space that encourages us to really look again and again. So I invite everyone, if you've had a chance tonight, to really spend time and wander in the space here. The show is up until January 12th, so you'll have some time to come back. And to consider, and especially after the opening event that we had for the show, to consider how natural color has been cared for, and how the plants, minerals, and water that go into making these pigments, inks, and dyes are considered friends and co-collaborators of the artists. So turning to Anong, who's our special guest and speaker tonight. Anong, your work as a painter in this exhibition, but also as a creator of paints, is really exciting and really inspiring. And tonight, we're not only celebrating your work in the show, but also the release of your first online publication and print book about the life and work of your father, artist Carl Beam. As author, as author, daughter, and storyteller, Anong, you offer a profound portrait of your father's life and a chronicle of his extraordinary multimedia practice. including key connections here to the Thunder Bay Art Gallery. And to note on the book, we'll hear more about this from Anong, but we don't have it for, if you're coming with the hopes of purchasing a physical book tonight, it's sold out. We don't have a copy here. It was also designed as a beautiful and conceived as a beautiful online publication that is free. You can access it through the website of the publisher, Art Canada Institute. If you need to hear that info again, you can find any of the gallery staff, but you can read it and find it there for free. And it's beautiful online as a PDF. So I'm going to introduce Anong now so she can share more about the book and her work. Anong Migwans Beam is a painter from Chaging First Nation on Manitoulin Island. The physical history of place, natural landscape, and the relationship between water and memory inspire her. Anong was born to artist parents, Carl Beam and Ann Beam, who encouraged her to develop as an artist. She was raised connected to her artistic familial roots and rich Ojibwe heritage. As founder of Beam Paints, she creates oil and watercolor paints sourced from local pigments and minerals. Anong has exhibited her work in solo and group shows across Canada. All right, so one more thing, Anong, before you're up here. Anong mentioned today that this group exhibition was the first time that her work has been on view in Thunder Bay, which is crazy. But technically, it's the second time because about 20 years ago, she had beautiful ceramic bowls in an exhibition alongside works by her mother, Ann Beam, and father, Carl Beam. And so I think this is the perfect place to let Anong pick up the story. Please welcome Anong Migwans Beam. You kind of have to hold it. Yep.
Okay, hello, thank you so much for coming out and taking some time to hear about my dad and my practice and my art and paint. I really appreciate your coming out, and also Thunder Bay Art Gallery for inviting me and being part of this beautiful exhibition with these other artists. This is really interesting for me because I was here before, like a really, really long time ago when I was a little kid, and we're going to see a slide go by of me about this tall in the same room. And I remember the carpet, the way it rolls up the wall. It's when you're like small and you're down at that level, it's really a striking thing about the room, the fact it's carpeted up. And I think in a big way, what I wanted to talk about is starting with my dad's book. I have a copy up here that you can look at if you want after the talk. This is really about how the power of art and color has really affected my life and shaped it so profoundly, right from the very beginning. Being really small, and I think every human, you start out and you have no expectations of life. You just start viewing and seeing things. And some of the first things you see, the first things that impact on you are colors. And then in my case was my mom and dad painting. So there was this interaction between me and color and paint and thinking about what it meant and what it could do. And to go in the beginning, to start with my dad, it was so transformational. And to watch him starting in his career, really, his first solo show was here in this room. And it was something that he really fought for. It's so hard for people to imagine. And if you think about it, it wasn't that long ago that an Indigenous person wasn't really allowed to have a current thought about the current world and express that in a visual way. He was constantly fighting against people who told him that he wasn't supposed to do what he was doing. It wasn't art. It wasn't his art. He just wasn't supposed to be doing it. And I remember him as everybody remembers him as a very larger than life person, but he wasn't extraordinarily tall, but he seemed to take up the room in any room he was in. So there he was, just kind of battling for the right to have an opinion about the world that he was in. And if I start back even further from that, he was born in Chiging First Nation, where we currently live now. And his father was an American soldier who died and didn't make it back from World War II. And when he was growing up, that was during the pass system time. You couldn't even leave Chiging if you wanted to. You'd be arrested. And then he didn't have the right to vote until 1960. It's just this cavalcade of things that suggested you don't have a right to have an opinion or interact with real Canada. And that was really reinforced through his experience at residential schools. And at some point through this really awful early childhood that he had, he goes through a whole entire first life where he had another family, he had a first wife and children. And I think that I can't speak to because it's before my time, but it all fell apart for him. And all of that dissolved, the marriage was annulled. He had been working trades jobs, like he helped build part of the Bloor Line subway, and he did forest firefighting and just a lot of things that you didn't need post-secondary education for. Somewhere in there, he gets a leg up where he can go back to school through Canada Manpower. And he gets one credit to do as an elective, and he chooses art. And it just opens a whole door to him. Every single thing that he does from that point forward is directed towards learning more about art. And I think that from our house at home and seeing the collection of art books that he had, he saw art as a way to talk about freedom and to fight for freedom, to demand freedom, to demand freedom of expression. So he goes to school and he gets a degree and he's trying to move on with being a professional artist. And the very first thing that happens is everybody tells him, no, you're not a professional artist. The art you're doing is not valid. And the first gallery to appreciate what it was that he was really talking about was Thunder Bay Art Gallery. So this is so transformational and pivoting for the history of Canadian art, because they don't just say, yes, you can put one painting in a show in a corner. They don't put him off on the sidelines. They fill the room, they fill the building with his art. They did a huge catalog and they just really got behind him. And that was Elizabeth McLuhan, who was the curator at the time. That sent ripples out through the art world. There were paintings in there that ended up having other artists do like responses to, Carl, he did one called Self-Portrait in My Christian Dior Bathing Suit. And this is really funny artwork because it's funny to look at. You see a man looking forward right at you and he's standing there in a bathing suit. And it's a small one, and it's unusual because it's a big watercolor. It's actually funny that at this point, we've come so far, but we still can't really talk about how technically excellent my dad was. Usually, whenever it comes up, we have to spend a lot of time going over the historical record of the treatment of Indigenous people in the arts in Canada. But if we scrape all of that away and we look at it as far as him as an artist, this is a masterful work. He was beautifully, exquisitely rendered in watercolor, which if you've tried it, you know there's no erasing it, and you can't paint over it. You just have to get it right the first time. So that's the introduction to art that I saw, was the fact that my mom and dad didn't have other jobs. They fully supported us on the art that they made, the paintings, the pots, the things that they did. And they homeschooled me and took me with them everywhere. So my favorite parts about that, the things like this were kind of freaked me out with a lot of people and the public speaking end. But I loved how many gravel pits we got to go to. And I think that's still my favorite thing. My boyfriend, actually, when I first met him, our first date was going out to gravel pits to look at rocks. So being able to look at color and having an education that said, here's art, here's something that you can put your shoulder into and you can share your experience, and it has the ability to affect change in the world. It can create things that weren't there before in serious ways that have serious consequences. And then to also experience art in a way that this is made out of physical material, this is made out of rocks, and here's where you find them. They're all around us. They're at rock cuts, they're at gravel pits, they're at construction sites, they're in plants that grow near us, they're part of the physical world, and we can interact with them to tell our stories. Is so much like what Nishnabek people used to do way back, making mizens and doing designs with pigments on rocks. They were telling little bits about where they had been, what they were doing, and what they were hoping for. So that's really taking my dad, putting it in a really tiny nutshell. I really encourage you to go online and check out the book, because it's very, I promise you it's not a dry read. It's interesting and it's very personal about how he moved through challenges to affect change. I reflect on what he was able to accomplish in such a short amount of time. He really only started painting when he was in his 30s, and he passed away when he was in his early 60s. So there was 30 years of work there where he just transformed the nation. And he went from a time where nobody said the word residential school. It was never talked about, to a moment where we can go to Tim Hortons and support residential schools. Like, I really am amazed how far that we've come. I know there's so much further to go with social justice and things like that, but I'm still pretty impressed. Personally, I look at it because the kinds of paintings that I do, if I had been alive the same age I am now when my dad was, I wouldn't have been able to do them. It wouldn't have been accepted. It wouldn't have been Indian art enough. It wouldn't have been based on legends enough. It wouldn't have been Norval Morrisseau enough. So the fact that I can just go out, feel something that I feel about a place that I've seen, and express my heart and soul through painting, that's a debt I owe to my dad. And I'm really grateful to exercise that as often as I get the chance to. So, continuing his saga a little bit further, he does all of that, bursting out into the front of things, demanding that his art be looked at, finding his audience. He does an amazing body of work called the Columbus Project that was really, really exciting, and it had so many elements that people don't really talk about all that much beyond just the Columbus suite of etchings. It also had sculptures, it had installations, and it was a real amazing exhibition. And eventually he's recognized for his work. He's nominated for the Governor General's Award for Excellence in Visual Arts, and then he passed away maybe 2 months after. So it was pretty quick. And it's about at that point I go through a few wilderness years after my dad passed because I had to find my own footing in what painting was for me. And it took years because I was looking for something, and really it was the birth of my sons that helped me find my way back to it, because I wanted to show them what I learned from him. And that took me back to nature. It took me back to going out to rock cuts and getting to go there with them. Just really helped me connect. So in that process, I started sharing out what I was doing. I kind of also, like my dad, I didn't want to be limited just to, oh, here's somebody making traditional paint. I had the goal of, I want to make the best paint. I want to make the paintiest, brightest, most vibrant, most wonderful, make you want to paint. And it's actually interesting because I know the person who bought the very first paint that ever from me when I was starting my business is in this room. And I don't think he knows that he's the one, but it was Christian Chapman bought my first paint. Which is really, really awesome and really cheered me on. And I'm really grateful to say that it's really taken a life of its own at this point, and I spend most of my time making paint and talking to people about paint, working with other artists, developing paint for their projects. This paint right there is an ink that I made for Tanya Lucan-Linkletter for a performance at SF MoMA. And she wanted a copper paint or a copper something. And it was so much fun to make that paint because that's the video of me testing it out. And as soon as I put it on my hand, I instantly felt the sun in my body in such an incredible way. Because it was made out of real copper. When the copper coated my hand, it was conducting the rays of the sun fully. And I suppose your skin naturally reflects it, but the copper absorbed it all. And my hand felt so hot. It was such an interesting experience. So I relish those points of contact, getting to work with other artists to find out what kind of challenges they have or what projects they have, things they want to do. I was really, really grateful to make paint for Alex Janvier for the past few years. And I think one of the neatest things ever was that they filmed him opening his box of all these paints we made for him. And to see how he reacted to seeing a paint that looked like him, that looked like it came from his own culture. He kept saying, "Holy Mackinac." And he was unpacking them all. And he actually had an order in with us for more paint when we heard that he had passed away. So in a way, I'm just really grateful that means he was painting right up to his last days. And that's a gift I hope I get to have too. Yeah, I thought that there was two ways this was going to go. I was just going to talk at you, or I was going to tell you what these pictures meant on the left. So it might go a little bit of both. So I guess I could say that's it in a nutshell, and just if anyone had any questions, we could do that. Yeah, okay. So if you have any questions, I'm ready about anything. Okay, well, right now, I did start out making oil paints, but I did a hard left right into watercolors. So most people do watercolors on paper, but there is a ground that you can get to paint on canvas that can let watercolors go on canvas. And actually, this one here is almost all watercolors on canvas. So that kind of gives you an idea a little bit of what it can look like. This is a process called distemper, where you treat a canvas with a bit of a binder to give it some, so it's not totally absorbing. And then there's a lot of soft blooms. Making paint it's really fabulous. It's absolutely my dream thing to do, because it's constantly different. And I think that it sounds funny, like when I started doing it in a really serious way, somebody told me, oh, it's great, like another paint maker. They said, yeah, you're gonna get to meet like all the different personalities of these pigments. And I felt that I knew them because I had been painting and been around art forever. But when you physically start crafting paint out of volumes of pigment, each one of them, they really do have these different personalities, that some of them come together like peanut butter, and they're very, like, it will make you, remind you of food so much, and you could swear that you'd smell it, that smells like the food that it looks like. And then there's other ones that are, they call it ziscanthropic, and it's this word for extraordinarily stringy, that they seem to just trail and be very, very syrupy. And other paints need pressure to bloom into themselves. And that's something that's pretty metaphoric too, I think. Like, there'll be some pigments, like Prussian blue. Prussian blue, you could, I'm sure there's chapters in books just on that one color, because one of the things that's so important maybe to talk about in an exhibition like this is how extraordinary natural color is, but also how toxic it is in certain ways. That all throughout history, the most vivid colors that come from the environment are usually have a lot of toxicity associated, like at least in mineral pigments. So like cadmium, lead, cobalt, those all provide really vivid hues. They're very, very toxic. Heavy metals go into your body and they persist, and they won't come out without chelation. All of that was really important to me because, like I mentioned before, my father had passed away quite young at 62. It was complications due to diabetes, but I also know at the time he passed, he was having chelation therapy, and he was really heavy, had a lot of heavy metals in his system. Partially probably from having a northern fish diet for a lot of his life too. But I know his art, the pigments he used paints that had heavy metals. And so when I started making paints, I'm learning about different pigments. There's this whole thing about natural pigments and then man-made pigments. It's interesting because so many things that are natural, you could make a case for it being natural versus man-made. Like if I take a rock and I put it with another rock and I let them sit outside until something happens, is that still natural? Or my interference has created the paint is slightly man-made. So Prussian blue, it was the first actual synthetic pigment that was ever made. And it's also the cure for heavy metal poisoning, which blows my mind. If you go into an emergency room anywhere, they actually have pouches of Prussian blue, and that's the treatment. They'll run it through your system intravenously, and it will grab and pull the heavy metals out of your system. So that was the first synthetic pigment. And that's the reason why I do a lot of work with, when it calls for it, I work with non-toxic synthetics, because overall they have a great longevity and are good for your system. Anyway, so back to what you said, that pigment, when you work with it, it comes out, it's like a gray. And as you're working it to turn into paint, it's changing colors. And the color starts opening up and getting deeper and brighter and deeper. And if you don't express that physically handle that pigment in that certain way, then it'll end up being raw and like unprocessed, so that if I had it on this painting, it would look gray, and if I rubbed my hand on it, the color would come out at you. So it'd be like a color changing pigment. Sorry. Okay.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about some of the specific paintings in the room and where they come from and what they mean to you?
Yeah, for sure. I think I would talk about this one. This one is this is one of my favorite paintings, and this comes from the point when I was really making a lot of paint, and this is the first painting that's all my own paint. And it was really fun because there are rocks, and there's parts in the middle of that painting that look like the cup and saucer. That's a limestone formation close to where I live on Manitoulin. So Manitoulin is made out of the best rock for making paint. It's kind of extraordinary. And there's a quarry on Manitoulin owned by a Greek man named Hercules. And I find myself going there a lot. My dad went there a lot, and he saves pieces of rock for me. And when I told him what I was doing, I thought he'd be like, wow, that's so cool. But he was like, cool as a cucumber. He was like, yeah, I know. This rock, this rock makes the best paint. I know all about it. It was really funny. So there I am making the paint from those rocks. And then I was painting these same rocks with the paint that was made out of those rocks. It had this neat circular thing that felt pretty cool, and I guess it's meta. I had a meta kind of moment there. This painting was really kind of about painting the landscape that I see myself in where I live, and there's all kinds of pictures in there of a bear, and above the bear on the left there's a full moon in my rear view window from my truck when I'm driving to my mom's house. And then to the right of that is the pulp mill in Espanola we drive past on the way to get to Manitoulin. And then there's a picture of me at the Cup and Saucer that's way up on this bluff looking out over the island. And then there's a couple of pictures of famous art historical paintings like the Matisse's Joy of Life. And they're photocopies of photocopies because my kids used to like to read my art books. And my oldest son would say, oh, I want to see the Jansons. And that's like this great big tome of art history. It's like this thick. And he would want to draw right over everything. So I started photocopying those pictures from the Jansons. So I photocopy Matisse and everything for him, and then he would draw on them. So the picture of the Joy of Life from Matisse is one of my son's edited versions of it, where he improved them. And there's a rocket ship from one of my dad's paintings on the right of a teepee that was set up in our backyard. So there's lots of things from my own life in the landscape, and then using painting and the trick of painting to connect everything, to connect places, people, time, events, states of being. You can connect them all through painting. It's the most amazing thing. You can paint a door that the door isn't there. The door can go wherever you want. It can show something that you're imagining or something that actually happened to you or anyone else. And in that way, I feel like painting, it just connects me to the whole world that ever was and that ever is going to be. It's absolutely my favorite thing.
What specific stones and rocks are you using?
I use a lot of iron oxide. I think when you look at like the most versatile natural existing mineral pigments, you're really talking about iron oxide and ochres. And iron oxide is this really, it's pretty amazing because it's chemically the same as what's in our body. And that's kind of why you can increase your iron by having cast iron pans, because you're just going to be absorbing that iron into your body, and it gives your blood the color that it is. But then you'd also notice inside your body the iron in your blood stays blue. So without the oxygen, it's not red, and it needs the oxygen and it needs heat to change. And if you can control a heat level, like a lot of commercially made man-made pigments are really iron oxide and other sources of stone that are heat fixed. And depending on how high up you go, you can get like a deep purple Mars violet almost. It almost starts going back to a bluish cast. Or lower, it's more like that. Yeah, there are, and it's funny because if I could rewind time, I would go to school for something like chemical engineering or something academic, because I do have a lot of cases of having to talk to pigment suppliers and people in industry about paint. And they have an entirely different dialogue. Like I've had times where I've just been right to tears trying to talk to somebody in that language. It's a whole different way of looking at pigments. The commercial thing is that they view color as color space. And they have these amazing diagrams that are kind of like these trapezoid shapes that tell you about what a pigment is based on these different points. And then they make like Venn diagrams of how these all overlap. And then it's pretty interesting.
So one last thing. When you name your colors, what inspires you to name your colors?
You know, that takes a good long while. But right from the beginning, I think when I started the business, I was really in love with Joy Arcand's work, Joy T. Arcand, and she had done this amazing body of work called Here on Future Earth, and it was digital images of, I don't know if it's her home community or communities in the prairies, and she had digitally removed all English signage and replaced it with Cree syllabics. And I still remember how I felt looking at those pictures, and just to see that active in her imagining was really, really cool. And I thought, I want to be part of that. And I started by naming all of the paints in Ojibwe just so that I could say them and I could talk about them. And it was really fun to have conversations with elders about different colors and how would you say this. And Ojibwe language is it's so funny. It's so beautiful. And like, I'll give you for instances, like glasses in Ojibwe is Shkinsko Kajganen. It means like little legs for your eyes. And the word minjimin we used for a travel case that we make to carry paints around. And that means sweet pea in English, but minjimin, which also means sweet pea, it literally means like nice little kisses. So that's a beautiful one too. And as far as the nitty-gritty of like the actual name, there's a lot of back and forth, and me and actually my boyfriend, we know when it's the right name because he'll say it, and then I'll just start laughing that, oh, that's the perfect color. Because the first one was I did this ochre color, and I said, I don't know, what are you going to call that? I already had a paint that was an ochre. And he just looked at it, and I think we're like watching TV, watching the news and having supper. He looks at it and goes, bread. And that was the first color he named. It was probably our most successful color. Yeah. Okay, what's your question?
Who is that sieving, that little boy?
Oh, okay. Yes, and you'll see this is my son is in here sieving stone for me, because when I was first starting, I couldn't get any help, and my kids have always been right there with me. So when you see a young man in there and he's sieving paints, that's this young man right here. He's still my first helper and my best helper, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's probably has to do with like I have always had a really physical connection to color, and somehow that connects to memory for me. Like if I actually remember the first time I learned about chartreuse, or I'm standing in this driveway with my mom, and the driveway is like black, like when it's rained, and you can kind of smell that in the air. And I'm looking like straight up the way kids do, and I wanted her to tell me what that color is. And she just looks down at me and she said, chartreuse. So I'm staring at that color, and she says that, and then she gets bored and she leaves. I'm still standing there, and then once she was gone, I went over to the base of these trees, and I ate the maple saplings because I wanted to know what that tasted like, that color. So I think when I'm painting, it's the idea of a landscape, and these paintings here, this one with the camp particularly, it kind of comes from this idea that when I look at the Canadian landscape, I see a lot of paintings in the historical canon, like Group of Seven paintings, or even more to the modern fore, that I don't see me in them, or I don't connect to it. It seems very removed. And I remember my dad talking about that. He said, I see all these landscape paintings, not one of them's got a fence in it. They don't have hydro lines. They don't have the no trespassing signs that I see everywhere. It's kind of this idyllic, solitary space. And especially the things with camps, because where I live in a community that is surrounded by 3 lakes. And I grew up not ever seeing any of these lakes because we all live in the potato fields and the internal land, and all of the lake land ends up being leased to non-natives who come and stay and then they leave. And so there's these kind of like uninhabited for almost 90% of the year. There are all these houses everywhere. And I remember my mom being kind of concerned at one point about, what if something happens, like, Y2K or whatever, one of those end of the world scenarios. And I told her, I'm not worried about that. There's like hundreds of off-grid palaces around here. And if everything goes down the tubes, I'm going to just pick one. And that'll be my place. So that was kind of what these paintings were about. That exact cabin is actually from a Peter Doig painting, and I love him as an artist, and I wanted to do it because I was trying to, in redoing some of his paintings, I was learning so much about painting, about how he built the image, but also like where he stopped, right? Like he didn't, I got to redo his painting, but expand maybe the camera lens out a bit more to have something that connected me to that idea of where I live. Yeah, okay. Oh, I don't know, maybe that's it. Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Anong. I'm going to encourage everyone to give Anong another round of applause. That was really generous, and congrats on your book.